Okay, welcome back. In my previous episode, I talked mainly about the Turkish sources I used for my research into the history and military events and political events of the Turkish-Greek War of 1919-1922, also known as the Batı Cephesi of the Turk İstiklal Harbi. Today I'm going to talk about my Greek print sources. Now, please understand, beyond print sources, I've been using a lot of e-sources, articles, journal articles. There's a huge amount of journal articles actually in English, much bigger than I thought, mostly on political events. That's available out there on JSTOR and so on. And of course, there's also e-versions and e-books and so on. But here I'm only talking about things I can actually show you. So let's start off with the heavy hitter. Okay. This is volume 2 of Eleftheriou Venizelou τα κείμενα επιμέλεια Stefano Ioannis Stefano. Eleftheriou Venizelou, the documents, okay? And it's a 4-volume series. Each volume is about as big as this one, covering the whole period of the career of Eleftheriou Venizelou, starting all the way back to essentially 1905, 1906, and ending with his death in 1938, 37, I think. I might be wrong on that. Don't quote me. This is essentially a collection of primary documents containing parliamentary speeches, articles, interviews, memorandum, and a few of the diary style moments kept by Venizelos. He was not a diarist. Stefano says that makes him a greater man than, let's say, Metaxas, who heavily kept a diary. And to put it simply, it's a must book to have if you're interested in doing research on Eleftherios Venizelos and you do not have access, for example, to the Eleftherios Venizelos Research Institute archives. It's a beautiful book, lavishly illustrated, pictures, and so on. This is the second volume, which actually covers the period from essentially 1915 to 1920. The whole book covers 1909 to 1935, so over here. I've got this from an antique bookstore in Athens. And I think this was the volume that was given to one Maria Karagopoulou. I don't know how it ended up in the antique store, but I grabbed the 4 volumes. It's worth buying them. It's a must if you want to understand Venizelos. If you want to do any research on Venizelos, these 4 volumes are a must. They're very important. Now, some of this information is available online, on archives. Some of the information is available on other documents, but some of this material is only available in here. And this has a nice thing that it collects a lot of what is disparately available in one source. So, highly recommended, worth buying. These are heavy books, 4 volumes, a must for research into Eleftherios Venizelos and his decision making, so Greek decision making, especially in the period 1918 to 1920. And it's still interesting after that because you can see Venizelos' reaction to the decision making of the Greek governments that succeeded him after the elections. Also his idea about like how he will do things if he was in power and so on. I use this heavily as a source in my chapter in my book. So a must for that research. Next one is this book, η ιστορία του εθνικού διχασμού κατά την αυτογραφία του Ελευθερίου Βενιζέλου και του Ιωάννη Μεταξά. This collects a series of articles written by Eleftherios Venizelos and Ioannis Metaxas during the period roughly from 1934 to 1935, okay? Greece was entering a period of polarization. There was expectations of a civil war. There was the 1935 Venizelist coup. It didn't turn out to a civil war because of mistakes done by the Venizelist side, but potentially that could have been the Greek civil war rather than the one that happened after World War II. And in reaction to that polarization, Metaxas and Venizelos engaged in a polemic through articles written in two of the biggest Greek dailies. I think the Metaxas mostly wrote in Metaxas mostly wrote in Kathimerini. Venizelos mostly wrote in, if I am not correct, Eleftherio Vima. Let's see. Yes, Metaxas in Kathimerini. Doesn't say where Venizelos wrote it. I think it's Eleftherio Vima, but I'm not sure. And what they do is they re-adjudicate essentially the whole period of Greek history from essentially 1912 to roughly 1935, with a lot of time spent on the question of the Treaty of Sèvres, its potential success, and who was responsible for the Asia Minor disaster. So it's a retrospective collection, but it's good in order to test certain alternative hypotheses, if you want. It's also an interesting story to see Metaxas' narrative of what happened, for example, and then Venizelos' apologia about what happened. So definitely worth seeing. This is the edition by Kyromanos, publisher. They are definitely not a Venizelist publisher, but this is a beautiful edition, and I suggest it. Next up is the most recent Greek book I bought, which is a biography by Mariana Christopoulou of Dimitrios Gounaris, the guy who was essentially the political core of the post-November 1920 governments in Greece, and the person who was essentially, in the end, executed as responsible for it. While he wasn't prime minister during the whole period from 1920 to 1922, he was prime minister in the key 1921 period during the great military operations of the Greek army. He was also essentially the power behind the throne for many of the other prime ministers. This book is a full biography of him. It's starting from his young years. It's a political biography, starting from his young years in the Patra in 1880, before the 1880s, and going all the way to his execution. Gounaris' personal archive has been lost. No one knows what happened to it. So the book contains some interesting information that is not necessarily easy to find. There's also interesting and cool pictures from various archives, so it's fairly illustrated. There's even a nice picture of Gounaris as a young man. Where is it? Let me see. And it's a must book to understand the political context of the decision maker by Dimitrios Gounaris. Okay, it's a must book if you are interested in contemplating and understanding why Gounaris was an anti-Venizelist, why did he pursue the politics of polarization that he pursued, and why did he make certain decisions during the period of the war. There are other biographies of Gounaris, but those other biographies tend to be hagiographies. They are written by essentially people who want to defend the memory of Gounaris. Remember, he had no children of his own. So, not a legacy left on a personal family level. I think this is a great biography. It's very interesting. It's not comprehensive, and it's not exactly focused as much as it could be on the Asian Minor disaster. So, there's a world waiting out there. There's a book waiting out there to be written about the decision-making, the political decision-making made by Greek governments from 1918 to 1922. That looks deeply into that. But it's a good survey book, and I suggest it if you want to learn about Gounaris. Unfortunately, there is no, from what I know, English biography of Gounaris available. Michael Lewis Smith, the writer of Ionian Vision, also mentions that. Someone might write one. It would be actually interesting to write a political biography for all the prime ministers of the November governments, and maybe some of the decision makers that were in the end executed. That's something that is lacking in the English bibliography. Next up, we have this book A recent book by Georgios Mavrovordatos, one of the most important historians slash political scientists in Greece. He recently wrote this book as a general overview of the national division and national split. Partly it's based on his English dissertation, Stillborn Republic, that discusses some of these aspects, but this chapter focuses mostly on the 1915 to 1922 period. I like it. I like the writing. I like the argumentation. I don't agree with everything that the author, all the arguments that the author makes, but it's a pretty good summary of it. There are more detailed summaries available in Greek, like the 2-volume books, which tend to also be a bit more politically oriented than this one. This still has a political orientation. The author characteristically says that objective reality has a Venizelist bias. I disagree on that to a second point, whether there is such a thing as objective reality in historiography, but this one is actually pretty good because it has a nice theoretical background, essentially arguing that the national schism was a conflict between two Weberian and charismatic personalities, and discusses how it impacted the Asia Minor War. So, good source about the political context. Some more about the political context. We got over here a short book that collects 3 parliamentary speeches of Venizelos done in the during his prime ministership. I think these ones were 1932, again where he provides an apologia for his actions during the war. Some of them are included in the Stefanou volumes, so if you have the Stefanou volumes, you don't really need this. Otherwise, it's a small volume. It's interesting. I got it from Politia. Do I think that it's special? Yeah, it's so-so. I will spend the money on the Stefanou part, to be frank. But it provides, again, some interest if you're interested in the Apologia. Next up, we have the Δο Σωτηρίου, η μικρασιατική καταστροφή και η στρατηγική του υπεριαλισμού στην Ανατολική Μεσόγειο. The Δο Σωτηρίου, the Asia Minor disaster and the strategy of imperialism in the Eastern Mediterranean. This book is essentially a pamphlet which summarizes in popular form the arguments of the Marxist historical school of the Asia Minor disaster in Greece, especially the work of Kordatos. So if you want an easy introduction to the Marxist argument, Δο Σωτηρίου is excellent. Her main argument is that the best solution for the issues of the Asia Minor Greeks was an alliance between the Greek state and the Bolsheviks that would essentially force the Turkish Grand National Assembly to recognize autonomy rights, especially to the Karadenise Pontic Greeks, which she cares about a lot. I'm not going to say whether I agree or disagree about it. There's some interesting information about some of the economic interests of foreign decision makers, especially, for example, Corzon's personal interest and stakes in the oil companies down in the Mediterranean. So it's a good book for a different perspective than the one that I believe is more correct. It doesn't mean that they're completely wrong. So if you don't want to read Kordatos' multi-volume history, just want to get like the main simple argument, this pamphlet can work. Next up, if you want to look a bit in Metaxas' role in the national schism and his view about the Asia Minor disaster and his actions during the Asia Minor War, Popular Autocracy in Greece, 1936-1941, a political biography of General Ioannis Metaxas by P.J. Vatikiotis is one of the few English available sources about it. Metaxas' diary has never been translated into English. It is available online for free, legally, from the Ioannis Metaxas website, but in a very bad way. They essentially have like scanned every single page and uploaded it as an individual page. It doesn't really help people, but okay, if you really want something from it. But Vatikiotis pretty much follows very closely and is mostly based on the diary. His Metaxas' activity during the period of the Asia Minor disaster is only covered in chapter 7 and chapter 8. It's worth going after and reading. Again, this is one of the few things that are available in English on Metaxas and in this period, just to understand a bit about the dynamics of the royalist. Well, not royalist is not correct, as Venizelos in that era was not yet a republican. So of the Constantinist supporting governments. Okay, so good book to find. Frank Cass, one of the very few books available in English on Metaxas as a political biography. There's another book that speaks more about his period of rule in Greece in 1936 to 1941. Let's see. Okay, here we got interesting. Κωνσταντίνου Δέλτα Σβολόπουλου, η απόφαση για την επέκταση της ελληνικής κυριαρχίας στη Μικρά Ασία. The decision for the expansion of Greek sovereignty into Asia Minor. If you are looking for the Venizelist apologia of the efforts of Greece to expand its sovereignty into Asia Minor, according to Greece, to liberate the Ottoman Greeks of the western coast from essentially Committee of Union and Progress rule and the threat that it posed. This is the book you want to read. Now, Zolopoulos is interesting because he is related to Skalieris, and Skalieris is probably one of the most anti-Turkish authors in the Greek corpus about that period. He wrote the Laike Phile tis Mikras Asias, which is a book essentially arguing that there's no such, the Turks are like a tiny minority in Asia Minor and stuff like that. So, interestingly enough, Skalieris helped Zvolopoulos build up his career, made connections and networks and so on. And Zvolopoulos has became one of the most important historians in Greece, the father of the whole school of historiography in a way. And this little book over here, published by the National Research and Study Center of Venizelos Archives, is the most succinct, it's very short, apologia for the decisions of Venizelos. So if you're trying to see how Venizelists will explain the decision of Venizelos and defend it, this is the book to read. It's also a good book in the sense that it explains why Venizelos might not have been able to understand some things in 1919 or 1920 that will then develop a bit more bigger in 1921 and 1922, and some discussion of what his plans were in case he won the election. So, short book, useful for getting the Venizelos side. I have a lot of stuff of Venizelos because my chapter in my book is all about Venizelos' decision making, why he decided to go to Asia Minor the way he decided. Okay, next up. This is a book by one of the fellow colleagues that contributed a chapter into the edited volume, Salvation and Catastrophe, the Greek-Turkish War 1919-1922. This is by Dionysios Tsirigotis. Dionysios Tsirigotis, Dr. Tsirigotis is a professor in Greece, an assistant professor international relations. He is a very, very promising and capable young academic. He's at Piraeus. Firmly somebody heavily influenced by the Panagiotis Iphistos school of study in Greece, especially on international relations. And this book is essentially a critical analysis of the grand strategy of Greece in Asia Minor between 1919 and 1922. His chapter in English is based partly on this book. He goes, he lays forth essentially classical realist or more neoclassical realist paradigmatic framework for making his analysis, and he makes a critical analysis of both the Venizelist period and the post-November Constantinist period. He does essentially, in my opinion, have a bit of a bias in support of Venizelos. Of course, he will disagree. We included emails on that, but that's my opinion. But generally speaking, if you're trying to find a critical analysis of the events based on the frameworks developed by political science for the study of international relations decision making, this is one of the best books out there, and we are working to try to get an English translation and Turkish translation, hopefully, for the centenary, because it's a good source. It's a good source. It provides a very good background about information. It has an explanatory power. I might not agree with all the implementations because I'm not a neoclassical realist as a political scientist. I belong to the Vasquezian issue paradigm. But I truly think that it's worthwhile reading if you know Greek. It gives a very good survey of the potential problems that were faced by the governments, the decision makers, and potential solution. It's not a book that really does a very good job, in my opinion, on looking at the Turkish side. So it's not completely a strategic study in that sense, strategy in the sense that it looks at move, counter move, move, counter move, but it's still a good book. And his chapter really does a good job of, putting forward his main argument. So hopefully we'll see the whole book in English one day, or Turkish, but for the time being, read his chapter in my book, my edited volume. Let's continue on. This book over here is one that is hated by a lot of Greeks that have certain political views. Personally, I find it a very interesting book. It's written by Tassos Kostopoulos. He is a left-wing, anti-national. I wouldn't call him anti-national. I mean, let's be frank. He's anti-national. He doesn't believe in the Greek national idea. A journalist who also does historical research, especially on the more black pages of Greek history. Is disliked for that. He definitely has a political agenda, but I generally think that he does a very good job in his research in trying to base it on as much as possible on good empirical sources and indicators. And this book, called Polymosque, Ethnography, War and Ethnic Cleansing, essentially focuses on the atrocities committed by the various sides during the long war period from 1912 to 1922. Now, he does focus a lot more on presenting the Greek atrocities, because he feels that the Greek atrocities are not well presented in Greek historiography and not understood by the popular view, to a point that might be true. But he also discusses the atrocities of the Balkan allies against the Muslim population during the Balkan Wars, atrocities committed by Muslims against Christians during the Balkan Wars. But the more interesting part here is his heavy look into the violence during the Asia Minor campaign, the Greek war with Turkey during 1919-1922. He is definitely someone who makes an argument that there was no genocide of Ottoman Greeks, of the Greeks of Asia Minor, whether we're talking about the Greeks of Western Asia Minor or we're talking about the Greeks of the Karadenizh Pontic area, the Pontic Greeks. So he does argue that they were subjected to ethnic cleansing by the Turkish Grand National Assembly. He also discusses the crimes committed by the Greek army and by Greek guerrilla groups, or groups that were associated with the Greek army if they were not Greek. His population statistic argument are, in my opinion, very useful, and it's a pity that people don't engage with them, that everybody just decides which population number they want to take and then bases their numbers from that. His argument about ethnic cleansing versus genocide is less persuasive, in my opinion, but I don't want to go into it too much. I mean, big deal if it was ethnic cleansing rather than a genocide. Even himself says that it was massive ethnic cleansing with the goal of essentially getting rid of the Greek community there. So, okay, semiotics, whatever. They would love a translation of this in Turkey. Yes, I think either Yeni Shafak or Sabah actually had an interview with him, but he is not willing to permit a translation in Turkish until he feels that books have been published in Turkey that discuss the crimes committed by the Turkish side during these wars as candidly as he discusses the crimes committed by the Greek side during these wars. So until then, and I guess he feels that this has not been done yet, he doesn't believe that this book should be translated into Turkish. But it's a good book to read even if you disagree with him, because you have to be able to react and criticize his position. And frankly, yeah, his sources are actually pretty interesting. I do think there's some bias about it. He relies a lot on the diaries and letters written by communists, by people who were communists in the 1930s and had fought in Asia Minor, and he almost exclusively uses their primary views. He takes, for example, at face value Kondylis' claim that he went and massacred massive amounts, 2,000, 3,000 Muslims during his march south of the Meander. I've looked at the Turkish official staff history about this, and I'm looking at the Italian one, and I'm not seeing that. So, be careful with that. But it's definitely something worth reading, even if you don't agree with it. Okay? Next up, we have the military history. Okay, the first book I'm going to actually show you is not about the war in Asia Minor between Greece and Turkey in 1919-1922. It is actually about World War I, and it is the green second volume book from the 2-volume history of the Greek general staff, of the Greek participation in World War I. The first volume covers essentially the period from 1914 to 1917, the politics, the mobilization of the army. This volume covers the actual war. And this is an example of the Greek general staff official histories. Sorry for coming back to that. I have to take care of something. So this is a classical example of the green books, which are the most up-to-date editions of the official general staff histories of the Greek army. And they are beautiful books. This World War I book has very nice fold-out maps. Just like the Turkish editions, the only difference is the Turkish general staff did us all a big favor and uploaded all of its books about the Asia Minor War, the 1919-1922 period, online, scanned. It's not the same thing as having them in hand, but of course it is a very big boon for researchers. Unfortunately, the Greek ones are not available online, and the only way to get them is to actually go to Greece, to Athens, and either get them from old bookstores or from actually the history general staff, Army History Directorate offices in Athens. Now, why is this book important? Well, it's important because it provides crucial information about the military experience of a lot of the commanders that will later on command units during the Greek-Turkish War in 1919-1922. So, Edward Eriksson, in the chapter in our edited volume, in his chapter in the edited volume, essentially argues that ultimately what determined the military victory of the Turkish Grand National Assembly versus the Greek army was the superior military experience, especially in commanding major units of the Turkish Grand National Assembly officers, especially at the level of major unit commanders. So if you want to test that argument, and I've collected some data on that, this book is a must, as it contains the unit histories in summaries of all of the regiments and above the participating in the war. And that's the nice thing about the Greek official military histories compared to the Turkish official military histories. The Greek official military histories at the end contain essentially a summary of the unit histories, which tells you where the unit was, its major units and everything. And this is unbelievably useful information, whether you're following around what happened in a battle or a campaign, or more importantly, whether you're trying to understand who fought when and where. So to understand the experience and the command experience of the Greek army and the Greek officer corps in 1919, this volume is a must. And it's also a beautiful volume to have. Why not? Now, when it comes to the war itself, this is my heavily worn Hellenic Army General Staff, Army History Directorate, a concise history of the campaign in Asia Minor 1919-1922, second edition. Until recently, essentially until Edward Eriksson's new book comes out, this is the only book in English which actually covers the military history of the war. It is essentially the translation of the concise one-volume summary of the 12-volume official Greek military history. So this is actually the information of 12 books forced into one, which doesn't actually work very well. It's full of maps, okay? It's so it has the fold-out maps and everything, and it is actually full of tons of information, mostly from the Greek point of view. That unfortunately it does not, and it has a photograph section in the end with some interesting photographs. And unfortunately, it doesn't have a reference section, since essentially its sources are the Greek version multi-volume history sources. Now, those do have reference sections. I've taken a look at them, and they don't actually use a lot of the Turkish multi-volume history because it didn't exist necessarily back then. In Chendai's book was translated and is heavily used, as well as some articles written in the Turkish military journal of the Army General Staff. So here's the thing. This is the most approachable source in English about the war for battles for both sides. So it's essentially written from the Greek point of view until the book is published by Edward Erickson. And again, Erickson's book is going to be mostly a military history survey. For if you're looking about a more detailed history that taps into the information in the multi-volume history as well, you have to wait for someone who is brave, someone else to do that, or maybe Erickson in the future if he decides, like, okay, I'll do that for the next 10 years of my life. And this is problematic. And it's not problematic because it has the Greek point of view. No. It's problematic because it is a terrible translation. It's terrible. It's bad. I don't know who translated this. The story I heard is that the army asked a Greek-American company or something to do the translation, and they did a terrible job. The maps sometimes do not meet with the description because unit designations have been changed. Words sometimes make no sense. Chapters are garbled. So while it is not so bad as to be completely useless, like the Dante version of the English translation of Lutuk, frankly, I would be terrified if I had to use only this book as a source for the war. You have to be very careful. It actually makes sense to actually know very good Greek, so you can actually cross-reference with other Greek sources. And you must also, by the way, have a Turkish military history source as well to cross-reference with the Turkish sources. But again, to this date, this was the only book in English. Again, I don't want to be bad. It's not a bad book. It is concise. It covers the whole war. It covers the Thrace front. It's very interesting. But the translation is bad. Very bad. If you want a bit more of detailed look on specific campaigns, over here I used Nikolaos Tricupi, Lieutenant General, διοίκησης μεγάλων μονάδων εν πόλεμο 1918-1922. This is the book written by Nikolaos Tricupi. He was the last commander of the Army of Asia Minor. During the Greek-Turkish offensive, he was the commander of A Corps and also took under his control B Corps. He was captured. His capture is celebrated as a very big event, and yeah, sure, I mean, it is a big event. He was the senior military officer captured by the Turkish side during the war. And after the war, he wrote two apologia in a way, and this is his military history. It covers the activities of the units that he commanded, so the 3rd Division during World War I, the combined Koritsa Brigade during the period between 1918 and 1919, the northern group of divisions in Asia Minor, the southern group of divisions in Asia Minor, the 2nd Army Corps and the 1st Army Corps. And it's pretty much his personal explanation. It's based on his personal archives, some Turkish sources, the Greek official military history sources, and so on. So, you know, if you're interested about the activity of certain commands in specific battles, this is a great source from the Greek side. For example, if you're interested in 2nd Inonu, known in Greek as Avgin Kovalitsa, he has a lot of interesting things to say about the action of the division, the 3rd Division that he commanded. Okay, There's a lot of similar books. They're not exactly critical military histories. They're not like a battle study, but they are primary sources that are useful for those who hopefully in the future will sit down and do some serious battle studies. Because what is missing in this war, and this is the fault totally of the historians, especially the military enthusiasts that work on this, is critical battle studies of the various battles of this conflict. Okay, there are narrative stories. I mean, I just showed the Sakarya book by Salim Erdogan in the last video. But those are not the same like the kind of high-quality critical battle studies that use sources from both sides, and especially the primary sources, to build that thing. And the reason for this is that the people who work on the military history on both sides refuse to learn the language of the other side. You cannot write a critical battle study of Second Inonu, okay, if you only rely on Greek sources and their interpretation of certain Turkish sources. You cannot do the same thing if you only rely on Turkish sources. So if you want to actually make a contribution to the military history of these events, frankly, sit down, learn Turkish, learn Osmanlicha so you can actually use the archives, and learn Greek. And that's it. That's how it is. Until then, and by the way, I am not any better in this, and that's why I never said I actually do history of the Asia Minor campaign. And my chapter in my book is mostly about the Greek decision making by Venizelos. Yes. Okay. So yeah, I mean, how are you going to do new stuff, novel offerings, and novel contributions to the military historiography of this war with one of the two languages that are central to the war? I have no idea. Okay? And that's why I didn't really spend too much time on going into the military history, because I don't know very good Turkish. I don't know Osmanlicha. I cannot use the archives. So until we get a corpus of historians, and especially PhD students, who are interested in military history, get the support they deserve by senior faculty, and sit down and learn Greek, and learn Turkish, and learn Osmanlicha, and go deep into the archives and work with the primary sources, the published ones, don't expect much. And this is shown. Let me show you these books. In my opinion, fairly or unfairly, the only critical analysis that I have seen in English or in Greek, and I dare say, I'm not sure 100%, but I do think also in Turkish, of a battle of this war, is the 2-volume work by Christos Delta Karasu, who was the chief of staff of a army corps during the Battle of Senketinonu, Avgin Kovalitsa. Okay, he was the chief of staff of Kontoulis, not Kondilis, Kontoulis. Different people. Kondilis, Albay, Kontoulis, Corps General. Okay, and this was privately published by him back in where are we? Back in 1968, okay? And Volume 1 covers the Battle of Avgin Kovalitsa, the Battle of Second Inonu. Volume 2 covers the conflict in the Southern Front, okay? It covers the Battle of the Lumpinar in the Greek history. I think in the Turkish historiography it's called Silahan, but I might be wrong, I don't remember it exactly. So each battle gets a volume. The book is very complete, very big. I'm reading it very slowly. There's photographic material inside it from his personal archive, including a picture of Edhem, who, when he was defeated in Kütahya by the forces of the Turkish Grand National Assembly, essentially sought refuge in a army corps, where Kondulis was the chief of staff. And it has beautiful maps, some excellent maps. Okay? And the interesting thing is Karasu knows some Turkish, So he's able to use some of the Turkish sources that are available back then. Now, the reality is that the multi-volume histories were not out yet, the Turkish multi-volume history. So he heavily uses various other Turkish sources. So he has a lot of original sources, of course. I mean, his own archive as the chief of staff. Okay, when it comes to Turkish sources, let me see. He uses, okay, Direction Générale de la Presse au Ministère de l'Intérieur, la guerre de la dépendance turque in première d'état Angora. So a book published in 1937 in French by the Turkish Foreign Ministry. From Gazi Mustafa Kemal Pasha, Der Weg zur Freiheit, 1919-1920, a German one in Leipzig. Gazi Mustafa Kemal Pasha, Die National Revolution, 1920-1927. I think that is Nutuk, so he uses Nutuk, he uses Kinross, he uses Lecher Eme Commandant la guerre turque dans la guerre mondiale, but importantly, Cevdet Kerim, in Jedai, okay? So he uses in Jedai's book, and also Ustungal Chesta Boje, as well as Haki. He says, Natal Bay, Lieutenant Colonel, Professor of Military History on the Military Academy of Harbiye, 1931 published. So not as many as others, but at least he tries. And again, I'm going to repeat it. This is the only book I've seen trying to make a critical analysis. It's not done a very good job. His work is very dry compared to the more modern ones. This is the only book I've seen until recently in Greek or English that tries to look at one battle rather than the whole war, rather than the grand strategy and everything, but one specific battle. Okay, two battles over here, second in Silahandul Pinar over here, and try to analyze them in depth with using sources from both sides. This is 1967. Come on. There's like 500 books published analyzing the same battle in the Boer War, and I don't know, and 1967. So these are my Greek print resources. Some of these books I'm going to be sending to a noted Turkish military historian. Hopefully he will be better able to do a job than me in producing actual serious military history using sources from both sides. I am very excited about the potentiality of that event, but unfortunately, yeah, we've missed a centenary. We missed the centenary. It's as simple as that. I mean, books have been published, no question about it. Very good books focused on the political side of the events. Very good books focused on narrative military history, on grand strategy, and so on. Our edited volume addresses various parts of it, but critical military histories of specific campaigns and battles, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know very good Turkish, so maybe something has been published in Turkish beyond Sakarya Baselim Erdogan. Say it in the comments, but I don't know. So here's the future glory for young historians. Learn Greek, learn Turkish, learn Osman literature. Sit down, work with the archives. Even you cannot get the archives, even if you just work with the multi-volume histories, the Greek and Turkish multi-volume history. So 12 plus, I think, 9 books, or 12 plus 24 books, 30 books, however. You can do something big no one has done before necessarily. Maybe, again, I am not a military historian, I'm a political scientist. And I know more about the stuff that I write about than others, but that is my feeling. Correct me if I'm wrong. Finally, I want to talk about two things. We over here, Paris 1919, Margaret Macmillan. I used it as a general context book. It's not the best book available for the political context of these events. There is a bigger English literature out there. Of course, there is Michael William Smith's Ionian Vision. I use that book as well, but I don't have a print copy right now here. I use my library. And I would like to point out that there are people in Greece that have been starting to do a much more critical analysis of the military history, especially of specific battles. Over here, I have by Vasilios Lumiotis, retired Brigadier General of the Greek Army, who has published an article called «Η ανώτατη διεύθυνση των επιχειρήσεων της Στρατιάς Μικράς Ασίας του Δεκεμβρίου 1920 και του Μαρτίου 1921», which is about the supreme command of the operations of the Army of Asian Minor in December 1920 and March 1921, so first and second in Anu. And this is an excellent addition to the historiography of the war, worthwhile to translate in English, which does a very critical analysis of the decision-making, not only the decision-making of the officers who were in charge, but also by why the officers were in charge, and it goes deep into the archival sources. So there are people who are picking it up. The problem is, Brigadier General is not a young man. So, lots of you like writing about this war with passion and anger. Lots of you are young. So if you're going to go into history and military history, sit down, learn Greek, learn Turkish, learn Osmanlicha, and make a mark that will last forever. So that was my discussion of the sources for the war. By the way, war gamers, the concise history is, if you're in English, probably your closest approach to a source that's useful for producing scenarios, but understand those scenarios are not going to be very empirically valid. That's it. My next video, I will start introducing the various chapters of my own edited volume. Thank you for your time. And again, those of you who are interested in the military history of this war and are young and full of energy and want to go and study military history, there is a gap in the literature and you can easily make a mark and a name for yourselves. Do it before a very well-known military historian in Turkey writes some 3-volume history of it and just covers the whole topic forever. Take care.